Glad you braved the cold to be out this morning. We're just getting going. I think usually that's how November works, right? We got a little bit of snow, more out in the farm than we did here in town. I think Portage maybe got more than Carmen too, but winter always comes. And then spring comes after that, so that's nice. This morning we are continuing to look at our series at how people's lives change when they meet Jesus face to face. It's a great thing that we get to see examples of this throughout Scripture and throughout the New Testament, that we see the impact that Jesus directly made on people's lives. One of the things we see is with Jesus that he just didn't just stick with the people that he was most comfortable with, people that he would have had the most in common. Now, he did spend a lot of his time with these people that his closest friends would have grown up in similar kind of ways as he did. But one of the things we see with Jesus is that he always took time to reach out and go to people and approach people that seemed kind of way out of his comfort zone. For somebody, growing up in a Jewish home with those traditions in that area of the world, he always wanted to go out and see people that others would look at and go, why are you hanging out with them? And so it's a great example to see in the different impacts then that Jesus makes throughout his time. Sometimes we see that he was spending time with people kind of on the fringes of society, people that were struggling, or people that kind of had certain reputations, people that were maybe considered as outcasts. So this morning we're going to look at that. And so have you ever felt like an outcast when you've been somewhere? Have you been in situations where you really feel out of place? Right? We've all probably been in situations at times where we kind of feel uncomfortable to be there. Maybe we've been somewhere where everybody that's there seems to know what's going on, and we're just kind of standing there hoping not to look silly or do something wrong. Right? We've been in those sorts of situations where we feel like, why am I here? Everybody else is so this or that. Why am I here? We have, it can be easy to feel like an outsider at certain times, but you probably don't feel that way all the time. We have places and people we like to be around that make us feel comfortable, that make us feel included. This may be with family or friends or coworkers, and hopefully with the church. So to start this morning, as we look at this idea of an outcast, I want to look at a little bit more of a modern story, although not super modern, to see how God changes people that are outcasts, and then we're going to look into John chapter 4, the biblical story of Jesus. But I want to start with this story about John Newton. That name may sound familiar to some, especially some that like to sing. But before he wrote the famous hymn, one of the most famous hymns in the world, John Newton was, by his own admission, a wretch. A term we don't maybe use a whole lot anymore, but that might give you a clue to who he is if the name doesn't ring a bell. He was a man who had intentionally run from God. After his mother's death, he abandoned her faith and embraced a life at sea that was notorious for profanity and rebellion. It said he was so vile that he was known for making up new curse words because the old ones weren't strong enough. He openly mocked Christians and did everything he could to destroy the faith of those who were around him. His chosen career was perhaps the only one that could match his rebellious heart. He became the captain of a slave ship. He was a central figure in the trafficking of human beings. He was a moral outcast, a man who profited from chaining others. But then, in an ironic twist, John Newton became an outcast himself. While in West Africa, he was betrayed by his colleagues and became the servant, essentially the slave, of another slave trader's African mistress. He was starved, beaten, and humiliated, forced to beg for food from the very people he had once helped to oppress. He was utterly broken, alone, and trapped. He was eventually rescued, only to find himself back on a ship in the middle of a storm, so violent it was tearing the ship apart. A man next to him was swept overboard. Newton, facing certain death, took the ship's wheel, and in a moment of pure desperation, he cried out, "Lord, have mercy upon us." That desperate prayer was the beginning. God did have mercy. The storm subsided and the ship limped to the shore. That face-to-face encounter with his own sin and the raw power of God didn't fix him overnight, but it started a process. The wretch who was lost was found. The man blind to his own sin began to see. John Newton would eventually leave the sea, become a minister, and dedicate the rest of his life to preaching the very grace that had saved him. And in one of history's greatest transformations, his former slave captain became one of the most powerful voices for abolition, using his own story, his greatest shame, to help the slave trade in England. John Newton was a man defined by his shame, a moral outcast to the world. He was spiritually thirsty, and everything he drank, rebellion, profanity, and money, only made him thirstier. But he had a face-to-face encounter with the mercy of God, and it gave him a new name and a new purpose. By giving us Amazing Grace, which is a song still frequently sung today, his story continues on. His story is not unique, however. It's the story of every person who was lost and then found. It's the same kind of story we're going to read about today. Not in the 18th century England, but as we'll see, at a dusty well in Samaria. This morning we're going to look at someone who knew she was an outcast. Not only an outcast at a party or an event, but all the time. Within her community, and even within the greater world. So let's get into our text this morning in John chapter 4. As we start to look at the woman of the well story, which is one maybe many are familiar with, we see that this story has a theme of thirst within it. So we should start by looking at thirst. We all know physical thirst. Every day, right, we need to drink. We need to keep our body in good working condition. It's not something we can go without. When we are thirsty, our body lets us know it craves for it. It needs to be filled. Thirst can be used to better understand not just our physical thirst that we have, but about the deeper thirst in our lives as well. A thirst for acceptance, for meaning, or for a fresh start. We all thirst for certain things during our life, hoping to grow and be better. This morning we see someone who needed the physical nourishment of water, but really she needed something much better. So let's set the scene here in John chapter 4. The place where we're introduced to is a place called Samaria. A place where Jews despised, and a place where Jews actively avoided. The history is important to fully understand what happened here. So we're going to give you a brief history of the place to know really the impact of this story. So the root of the conflict goes back over 700 years before Jesus to the fall of the northern kingdom in Israel. In around 722, the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom, whose capital at the time was Samaria, and deported the majority of the Israelite population that was there. The Assyrians then brought in people from other parts of their empire to resettle their land. The few Israelites who were left behind eventually intermarried with these new pagan settlers. To the Jews in the southern kingdom of Judah, who were later exiled to Babylon and returned with a fierce commitment to racial and religious purity, the Samaritans there were seen as a half-breeds. They were no longer pure Israelites. Their bloodline and their religion had been corrupted by the pagans that had come in. The Samaritans claimed to be the true worshippers of Yahweh, but their faith was radically different and seen as a counterfeit by the Jews. The Samaritans accepted only the first 5 books of Moses' scripture, and so they rejected all the prophets, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and the writings like Psalms and Proverbs that the Jews held very sacred. The Jews insisted that the only true place to worship and sacrifice was the temple in Jerusalem. The Samaritans claimed the true holy site was Mount Gerizim in Samaria. They even built their own rival temple there. So to the Jews, this wasn't just some minor disagreement. It was blasphemy. It was a rival religion trying to steal their God, their history, and their holy place. The bad blood between them was not just ancient, but it was active and it was violent. When the Jews returned from the Babylonian exile and began rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem, the Samaritans offered to help. We see this in Ezra chapter 4. The Jewish leaders, though, flatly refused, saying they had no part with them. So in retaliation, the Samaritans did everything in their power to stop the construction, writing letters of slander to the Persian king and threatening violence. The hatred became permanent around 128 BC when a Jewish king led an army into Samaria and violently destroyed the Samaritan temple on Mount Gerizim. By the time of Jesus, this was not a friendly rivalry. It was centuries of deep-seated racial, political, and religious hatred. Jews viewed Samaritans as racially impure half-breeds. They viewed them as spiritually impure heretics who created a counterfeit religion. They viewed them as historical enemies who had tried to destroy them. This is why devout Jews would literally add days to their journey to walk around the entire region of Samaria rather than set foot on what they considered to be unclean land, inhabited by unclean people. So this history sets the stage for this encounter that we see in John 4. We see here that when the woman was at the well was about the 6th hour, or about noon at the day. And there was a Samaritan woman coming to the well alone. This tells us a lot. Women came for water in the cool of the morning, and they came together. Her solo noonday trip was an act of shame and social isolation. She was avoiding the whispers and the judgment and the rejection of the ones in her community. She was an outcast on multiple levels, religiously, socially, and morally. We see here in verses 4 through 6, it says, now he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. He had to pass through Samaria. This was not a geographical shortcut, but it was a divine appointment. Jesus was willing to go there where no one else would, to meet someone that no one else valued. This encounter shouldn't be happening. By doing this, Jesus shatters 3 major barriers, speaking to her. The first is a cultural barrier. At the beginning of verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" As we see, Jews and Samaritans hated each other. They had centuries of racial and religious animosity. But Jesus takes action. He initiates. He doesn't see a Samaritan, he just simply sees a person. All the traditions and cultural impact Jesus would have grown up with should have kept him from doing this. But he knew what needed to be done, and even though it would change how some people would see him. We then see this social barrier at the end of verse 9 and then verse 27. For the Jews do not associate with Samaritans, as we talked about. In verse 27, just then his disciples returned, and they were surprised to find him talking with a woman. A man, and especially a rabbi, would not be speaking to an unknown woman in public. This was not proper of a man like Jesus. People in his position would be concerned with their public reputation, not wanting anyone to think poorly of them. But Jesus speaks to her with dignity and with respect, showing that he values her. In verse 10, Jesus immediately moves from the physical to the spiritual. It says, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." He wants her to start thinking of things in a different way, in a spiritual way. We then also see the thirst. In verses 13 to 15, she's still thinking of this physical water. Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water." Her response is heartbreaking. She's not just tired of being thirsty physically, but she's tired of the shame of having to come here. She needs a way out of her daily grind of shame. So for us, we too are thirsty. Where do we look for acceptance and belonging? We may look for it in our relationships. Maybe we look for it in our careers. Or maybe even our possessions. But these are wells that we have to keep coming back to be refilled when we feel thirsty. But Jesus here offers a living water, a spring inside us that truly and permanently satisfies our deepest thirst for God. So Jesus now moves from her general thirst to her specific pain. And so we see this pivot in verse 16, where Jesus says, "Go call your husband and come here." That we can look at this and see it as this kind of gotcha moment if we didn't really know how Jesus communicated. But Jesus isn't trying to condemn her or make her feel bad. He's trying to heal her. But he must touch the wound to clean it. In verses 17 and 18, the woman answered, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You're right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you've said is true." But we then see this revelation of grace. We can imagine her face. The one thing she has hidden, the source of her shame, is now in the open. This man knowing who she fully is. She's fully exposed. And Jesus doesn't leave. He doesn't recoil in disgust. He stays. And this is the gospel. Jesus sees everything you've ever done. He knows your deepest secrets and your worst failures. And he still offers you living water. His knowledge of you doesn't lead to condemnation, but to acceptance. We then see this reveal in verses 19 to 22, where she deflects to this religious debate. She said, the woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews." So Jesus brings it back. Worship isn't about a location, but it's about how. Verses 23 and 24, "But the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." Jesus then gives this outcast woman the clearest, most direct revelation of his identity. He says in verse 26, "I who speak to you am he." This we see change the woman, as we see that she shared this knowledge with her community about Jesus. The face-to-face encounter with Jesus changed her. We see this in a simple symbol in verse 28, "So the woman left her water jar." This is the climax of her story. The jar was the symbol of her old life, her thirst, her burden, her shame, the very reason that she came. And she leaves it. She doesn't need that anymore, because now she has found the living water. We then see the mission in verse 28 and 29. At the end of 28, it says, "And went away into town and said to the people, 'Come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?'" She runs back to the town, the very town that she was hiding from. And her testimony to come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Her greatest shame has now become her platform. The thing she most wanted to hide is now the very thing she uses to point people to Jesus. And then we see the result. In verse 30, they went out of the town and were coming to him. We're coming to Jesus. And in verse 39 to 42, it says, "Many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them. And he stayed there 2 days. And many more believed of his word. They said to the woman, "It is no longer because of what you have said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves. And we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world." An entire town comes to see Jesus because of this woman's testimony. She went from being a social outcast to being the first evangelist in Samaria. The townspeople had their own face-to-face encounter. As they said, we no longer believe just because of what you said, but we've heard it for ourselves. We see that when Jesus comes to your life, things start to change. In your life and the life of the people around you. Jesus was changing the hearts of people that had this prejudice built up for hundreds and hundreds of years. And Jesus was showing them true love. This woman came to the well as an outcast, defined by her past, burdened by her shame, and dying of thirst. And she had this face-to-face meeting with Jesus and left a changed person, defined by her future, freed by his acceptance, and filled now with a purpose. So as we look at our lives, what barriers do you see? Barriers in your own life that you've set up through your past or through your culture. Barriers you've put up against others. Things that are keeping you from fully embracing people. Things that are keeping you from reaching out. We may not have a heritage of hundreds of years of prejudice. We all have our things within us that keep us from going to people, reaching out and embracing them. But Jesus can eliminate all that. So what are you thirsty for? What are you thirsty for in your life? What wells do you keep returning to satisfy that thirst? We can have things in our life that we continue to go to find acceptance, only to come up empty. When we look for Jesus, those things start to fade as we mature and grow. We move past them, and we know where our true acceptance comes from. And what water jar are you carrying? What is it that you carry with you that you cannot seem to leave behind? Is it a shame of past sin or of regret? A face-to-face encounter with Jesus is an invitation to leave it with him. As believers, your mess has become your message. Like the woman, don't let your past define you. Let it be the testimony of grace that has set you free. Go and tell. People want that authenticity. They want to hear what you've gone through and how you came out of it. They want to know how you have peace in your life. And ones that are seeking, you may feel like an outcast. You may feel that if God really knew you, he'd want nothing to do with you. This can happen with many people. But the good news from that well is that he already knows. And he's here. He's waiting. He's offering you acceptance, a new beginning, and true satisfaction. Being a part of the family of God puts us in this place where we're never an outcast. As a family, we encourage and welcome each other to make sure no one is left on the outside. Everyone wants to be included and a part of something powerful and amazing. So we need to welcome people in, to come and see Jesus and see the life-changing effect that he has. When we may feel like an outsider, we can remind ourselves of this encounter between Jesus and this woman. The Samaritan woman's story reminds us that Jesus sees us fully and loves us completely. we can have a hard time seeing who we truly are, or our true potential and our true purpose. We get in our own way. But we need to remember that Jesus sees all of us and knows who we truly are. Despite all those things, despite all our faults, he still loves us. He sees the best in us. We need to make sure we are listening and looking for those opportunities to serve when they come. He satisfies the deepest thirsts of our souls. We all have goals of what we want to do or what we'd like to see happen. Jesus knows what we thirst for the most. We need to give those things up to Jesus so he can change us. He transforms our shame into a story that points others to him. When Jesus changes our lives, we cannot simply be grateful and move on with life. The woman at the well did not just say thank you and go home. She went to tell everyone. We need to be bold enough to do this as well. It can be difficult and uncomfortable, but people need to know. We need to tell people about Jesus and help each other grow in our lives with Jesus. When we meet Jesus face to face, we find what we're searching for. Let us come to him and let him change our lives and the lives of those around us. Thank you.